Welcome, snackers. This is Hannah Jones, and I'm here today with SNAC superstar Ruben Lopez. Ruben is the CEO of Ruben's Machine, which I like to call an art and philosophy company, but I don't really think that's what he calls it.
No, that's pretty accurate.
Close enough, yeah. Ruben is an artist, and he is going to be talking with us today about a number of different subjects, and actually has some slides to share with us, after which we'll be having a conversation that everybody can jump in and enjoy. So without further ado, I'm going to make everybody but Ruben disappear. Can I do that? Maybe we'll just all make ourselves disappear. And then, Ruben, do you want to launch into your talk right away?
Yeah.
Let's do that. So does everybody know how to stop your video and mute yourselves? Goodbye.
All right, so let me see if I get this down right. All right, okay. So is the screen share working? Well, I guess you guys are muted. I'll assume it is.
Yes, it's working.
Oh, okay, great. So yes, as Hannah was saying, I am my focus is art and philosophy, but my focus is really, it's all around the idea of what governs attention, because as I'm sure you've all experienced at some point in life, you can have the desire to focus your attention on something and fail completely. You can have something very important that you must do, and it's not that hard, and it will have great benefit to you, but for whatever reason, it doesn't work. And it is kind of the interplay between the moment and the future. There's your future self that represents the potential of what could exist, and it is constantly acting on attention, fighting for control, of trying to do the long-term benefit instead of the short-term benefit. And this is basically willpower, which is a catch-all phrase for all things related to deferred gratification. But what I'm going to talk about is the idea of, instead of treating it as willpower, zooming in on the smallest bits perceptible. And I will start with the idea of the task. And the task is basically it's a thing to be done, and there are fun tasks and sad tasks, and how fun or unfun something is relies mostly on a cost-benefit analysis, where on the subconscious level there's a constant process running, which is how much good will this give me, and how much will I have to pay in order to get it. And this process is not very smart by human terms. For example, eating healthily. It can be very, in theory, huge benefit, low cost. Or exercise is the same thing, where you only have to force yourself to do a little and you get huge benefit. But what we think of as a huge cost or a small cost versus what our subconscious thinks of as a huge cost or a small cost is very different. So I'm going to talk a bit about what cost exactly is, and I call it resource management. And it is, if you think of the task as there is some content in consciousness, and it manifests itself in the actions that you do in your day. The transformation from will to doing is the task, and it comes with a cost, and that cost is it's attention, but it's also energy. And it's hard to use the word energy because it's hard to define, but energy is just the capacity to redirect attention. So if the task is simple enough, it's not hard. For example, if you want to fry an egg, it's really straightforward. If you've done it enough times, you don't have to think about every step. You don't think, oh, I go into the fridge and I take out the carton of eggs and I open the carton and I crack an egg and I put it on the skillet that's already hot. It's automatic. But once it gets a little bit harder, for example, if you want to eat healthily, but you're not in the habit of it, you want to prepare a salad, the tasks start piling up. It is what food is healthy and that I also enjoy, what is cheap, what can I buy that won't just rot in my fridge, what supermarket stock would I have? And unless you're aware of the multitudes that are contained in a task, the task becomes very hard to do because the cost associated with the task isn't so much performing the task. The cost is the design of the task. Where if for a simple task, there is no design. But the more and more complex the task, the bigger the design grows, usually without even being perceived. So if you have tasks that rely on tasks, that rely on tasks, that rely on tasks, that is the recipe for an unsolvable problem. In the task execution process, there's a whole bunch of resources. There's money, there's time, there's physical energy, there's the amount of physical labor you can do. There is there's a whole bunch of stuff, but most of the limiting factor is how much assessment is going on. Assessing a situation, is this a good decision or is this a bad decision? That is at heart the hardest part of all tasks. And it gets compounded, like I said in the previous slides, when you don't have the information. If you don't know how big a task is, then assessing the task becomes a task that is impossible to do even before you get to the task that you originally want to do. So the factors that are the real killers are unfamiliarity and doubt and distance in time. So for example, if you are doing something and the payoff is very far away, it is less real. The moment is real. Things that you experience right now, sensations, or even thoughts of the immediate things that are coming are real. But something abstract like in a year or in 5 years, that reward might as well not exist. And the sad part is that life is just filled with these kinds of things. That's why that's why coaching exists. That's why if not, everyone would be Superman. Everyone would be living their perfect life. But it is borderline impossible to live a perfect life. But there are some pretty cool strategies, and these are my favorites. The philosophy behind the strategy is to avoid assessment entirely. If assessment is the bulk of energy expenditure, the practice of sketching is a way to isolate one resource, and that resource is I'm trying to accomplish something without assessing it. So I use up a little more time, and I have to establish the habit, but I don't actually. I avoid wasting my bottleneck. My bottleneck in the sense of there is one thing that makes me run out of energy first. Once I've assessed too much, I can't do it anymore for the whole day. So I will do whatever easy activity I can. It might be reading, I don't know, reading fiction or watching a show or playing a video game. But once my attention runs out, it's out. So I'm doing my best to preserve my attention through the task of sketching. And what sketching is isolating the task down to just one thing. And that thing is recording consciousness. There's always content being produced by consciousness. It is it's a stream of thoughts that sometimes is language, but it can just be feelings, it could be gestures, it could be movement. And so the act of sketching is recording that process without evaluating what the content is. It is either writing down whatever comes to mind, drawing symbols, even stuff like videotaping yourself falls under the umbrella of sketching, where there is no analysis of what the sketch is. There is just attention that is focused entirely on listening to consciousness itself. And that is, I guess in the last slide there, I have awareness being focused entirely on the interior. While you're sketching, it's inevitable that there will be distractions that come up. You'll either run away with a thought, or some external thing will come, or this just focusing on anything is really hard. But once you notice that you are looking at something else, bring attention back to sketching. And here I'm going to skip a few slides. This is an example of the sketch that I did this morning to prepare for this very presentation, where I start with ideas that are interesting to me. Things that I know will probably show up, but not necessarily. So for example, here I have, I was going to focus a lot more on how the future self relates to the moment, or how consciousness itself manifests. But while I'm creating it, I don't even know what I'm writing down. It is the most automatic of processes. And if my attention strays from it, I just go right back to sketching more. I'm going to go back now to the next step, which is sorting. Because sketching itself, it is fun and it does feel productive, but it doesn't really get anything done until it's sorted. And sorting, there is no right or wrong way to do it. It is just observing. It's observing the content that you've recorded and putting some meaning to it. And it doesn't really matter what meaning. The only guidelines are that, again, there is no assessment. There is not, this is a good thought or this is a bad thought. It is just, I see that I had this thought. And ideally, I see that I had this thought multiple times. It's not running away with the thoughts. It's not looking at something that I've created and expanding on it. It is just noting it and putting it in a box with like-minded things. So I guess, yes. So this was the sorting for the previous page, where I should have done them side by side. But it is every time I notice the topic come up more than once, I wrote it down, and the ones that came up a lot, I put a box around. The ones that came up less, I did a smaller box. And I did not include everything here in the presentation because there are many other. This was just one sketch and sort cycle. But after this, I did sketching on each of these topics. I did sketching on attention, on will, on task, on moment, on future, on content. And then again, I sorted it. And then once I felt comfortable enough with understanding my own thoughts, then I combined that whole process with the idea of a presentation. How would I present it in a chronological order that made sense and fit a pattern? Yes, and I guess this is the last slide, which is an overview of just directions on how to sketch. This is actually a very early version of sketching, but I think everything I said is still true. It is just, don't make the task complicated, because figuring out the task is the hardest part. If you can avoid coming up with tasks, you can avoid most of the problems with getting something done. I think that's it. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Hi. Come on back, everybody. I have a weird stripe on my face from the sun. Thank you, Ruben. That was really, really cool. I call Ruben Meta Ruben.
Yeah.
Because I am not surprised and was completely delighted that your sketching and sorting presentation had a sketch and sort in it that had to do with creating your sketching and sorting presentation. Yeah, that's
So
great.
sketching is a certain kind of brainstorming.
Yes, it is it is brainstorming, it is note-taking, it is just having one very isolated task. The only thing that I would differentiate it from brainstorming is that I would see brainstorming as slightly more directed, where you are usually brainstorming about a topic. But it's kind of just a spectrum, where on one end there's no filter, there's no qualifiers for what is valid to write down, what isn't. And then you can kind of get towards the other end of the spectrum, which is I am focused on this one specific topic, and any other ideas I'm excluding. It is at some point you do have to get to the refined part. But the hardest part for me is if I'm at an impossible task. I know that something needs to be done, but I don't know exactly how to get from A to B. And then the basic level of sketching never fails because it's the easiest task in the world. Every barrier to a task is, they compound quickly. Even tiny barriers will get in your way super fast. So it's isolating a task that can always be done at any point. And also that even with the easiest of tasks, there still needs to be a backup task. So for sketching, it is listening to what's going on in your head. But sometimes you're thinking, wow, my head is so blank, I can't think of anything. You kind of get, you draw a blank even though thoughts constantly come. So then is the backup activity, which for me, pacing is good, doodling is good, listening to music, some other activity that is even easier. And sometime, somewhere in the process, eventually a thought will occur. And then once you notice that thoughts are occurring, that's when you remember, oh yeah, I was doing sketching. I guess my brain does work. And then you just get right back to it.
Mhm.
It kind of almost seems like a form of meditation.
Yes, it is extremely meditative. And meditation is very hard. I'm sure you guys all know that it is, your focusing attention is super hard, whether it be breathing or your own thoughts or anything, which is why the criteria is so loose, because it is, any task is hard. So it is trying to design a task that is as easy as possible while still being functional.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I noticed, Ruben, was that it's you're describing assessing a task, and it just sort of made me think of when I'm working with kids on the spectrum or kids who are struggling with ADHD. We often have to sketch how big is the problem, and I use a lot of visuals and a lot of sketching with the kids because this is such a block. It is going from 0 to 60. There's this almost this inability of seeing the gradation between a doable task and oh my God, I could never even imagine doing that task or getting that done, right? There are the gray areas in between. And so sketching those gray areas out is a form of assessment, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah. Well, I would actually, because assessment can mean a lot of things. When I use the phrase assessment, I usually mean it in the sense of a binary of is this a good thing or is this a bad thing?
Okay.
Which I try to live by the rule of never assessing. And I do it for sketching, but I do it for everything. I try to not see things as something is a good thing or something is a bad thing. It could be something that just seeing how frequent something is, like for intrusive thoughts, noting how much something comes up. And if I see something, I try to, the next step is, can it be addressed? And then some things just they're unaddressable. Like if it is, I don't know, anxiety about the world, how
Yemen.
scary the world is.
Yemen, right? Oh my God, Yemen
At
is.
some point, you just have to say, I recognize it, this thought is intrusive, but there is no action I can take right now that will change it.
Okay.
And it's very hard to deal with intrusive thoughts, but just recognizing them from my experience goes a long way.
One of the interesting things that you said is that, you know, if you notice sort of which different mental tasks take the most energy, assessment is one of the biggest ones. That, you know, that whole idea of decision fatigue, there's been so much written about it. Like, for instance, have you heard about the people offering free samples of jam and then trying to sell jam? You know, that's if you have 5 jams out and you let people try samples and then you ask them to buy jam, and then if you have another table the next week and you have 15 jams out and you can let people taste samples and they can choose among the 15 jams, sales for the day that you have 5 jams are much higher than sales on the day that you have 15 jams, because people have decision fatigue. You know, they get so overwhelmed by the choices that they make no choice at all.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that that really is the bottleneck so often in getting anything done. And your example of trying to eat healthily and all the micro decisions that go into making that one seemingly straightforward decision is such a beautiful example of that, because it's true. You have to decide where to go shopping, what you can afford, what's, you know, what ingredients to put in. And then there's, you know, the whole question of like how good is good enough. Like, am I going to be a complete, you know, vegan who eats nothing but organic stuff that I dig out of my own backyard, or am I going to just, you know, try to do a little bit better, and what does that look like?
That's one of the things that I was going to include, and I didn't because it's kind of a tangent, but it's the idea that specifically with health outcomes, that there, if you look at large numbers, people who lead a vegetarian diet are notably healthier than the average. People who lead a paleo diet are also notably healthier than the average. The diets are the exact opposite. So it is more that, this is just my theory, I didn't include it because it's kind of off the top of my head, but that once you have very clear guidelines for what you can eat and what you cannot eat, it makes taking control of your diet so much easier. Same with intermittent fasting. That's pretty popular right now, which is the same thing, where it is just very, very simple, but rock solid guidelines where I cannot eat before this time or I cannot eat after this time. And it is putting attention on your consumption, which is the root of healthy eating, but doing it in a very streamlined way.
Exactly. They're just different lenses. And that's why, like in my coaching, so often I talk about disambiguating, making a decision and doing the thing. So if you're trying to make decisions, especially a cascade of decisions like you're talking about, and then do the things at the same time, it's so much harder than just having the decisions be separate. So what I hear you saying about sketching is, even before you make the decisions about the project or whatever, you're sort of letting yourself say, I'm going to write down everything that comes into my head about this with zero judgments.
Yes.
And then I'm going to put it together in a, just sort of put things in piles together so that I can see what it is, and which things are relatively larger and smaller. Which, Mary Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are some people whose executive dysfunction works in such a way that they might need some assistive technology to get them to that next step, right? Like a graphic organizer or something, because they wouldn't have that same ability to see patterns and organize and create things. You sort of make order out of chaos in the way that you're doing it, Ruben. But even if you say like there needs to be some connective tissue between this and this, it's still a super useful schematic for thinking about it. And certainly in creative work too. I mean, I agree with you, Emily, that like it's very much like brainstorming and then refining brainstorms, and that iterative process, like going back and forth, is so great for creativity. But it's interesting to see it in the context, not just of creative work or imagining, but really seeing productivity as a creative enterprise.
Yes, it really is, because creativity in popular culture means something very specific.
Right.
But at its root, it is just an exercise in novelty. It is doing something that has not been done before.
Mhm.
And even the most routine tasks have not exactly been done before. They haven't been done before on that day. They haven't been done before with your current mood.
Mhm.
Everything is kind of on a spectrum where everything has some element of newness. And once there's a certain threshold, and it's different for every person, but once there isn't enough familiarity with something,
Mhm.
the challenge of the task increases exponentially based on how unfamiliar it is.
Yes, absolutely. And especially, I mean, in some ways, if it's unfamiliar, it's hard. And it's even harder if you've been doing something another way that is familiar that would be easy to
Mhm.
fall back into.
Yeah.
Um, So is it okay if we pivot for a minute and talk about how you've used this idea and other related ideas to help you develop the project that you're working on right
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So this is my morning ritual. It's especially useful for when I have a roadblock, but I like it so much that I just do it all the time. And it is not directed around anything, but patterns do emerge when I look at, if I look at one day's and then I compare it with the rest of the week. It is clear where I'm going. It is clear what the most important thing on my mind is. Often things that I'm not even aware of. So for example, the latest one is correspondence. I've noticed that over and over, the topic of being a better corresponder has surfaced. So now it's just repeated enough in my life that it's kind of absorbed into my identity of the thing that I'm doing is I'm doing my project, but also a big part of the project is being in good communication with people who are important to me, both on the personal level and professional level.
now?
And in terms of super long goals, like I was saying in the presentation, it's very hard to visualize when things are done and to know what needs to be done. So I think for me, that's not that effective a strategy. It can be. I can definitely get hyped up on one day or another day. But what's much more effective is to just really enjoy the process itself, doing things that are fun, doing things that are intuitive, and finding patterns, finding those eureka moments. That is, I think, for any creative person, when you create something and things fit together, that feeling is so good. Yeah, so chasing rewards is my main strategy.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think some of the sketches you've done in the past have been larger scale and some have been smaller scale, right? So you can have a sketch about like, how is Fall Creek going to be structured?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Fall Creek and what it is actually?
Yes. So it is it could be called a visual novel. I recently learned that that's a thing in Japan where it is basically a book, but every page or every few pages, there's a set of decisions, and the decisions influence the course of the rest of the book. It's a book about someone who they wake up in a forest, and it's kind of like an amnesiac starting where you don't. It's what is it? In medias res, and it is you find companions, and it is a combination of finding companions who kind of hard to describe. It's about reacting to your circumstances and reacting to randomness. So sometimes your character will have an affinity for certain types of people. Sometimes you'll have an affinity for certain types of creative projects. Sometimes you'll have an affinity for certain types of plants. And these elements all interact. So the game is playing the story, but at the same time, trying to find elements that fit your personality. And it is for kids. It's for all ages, but it is nonviolent, and and kind of just a chill game to relax to. It's not hardcore gaming. It is a game, but I want it to be more on the artistic / picture book side of things.
I love that. I love that idea. It's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Right? Can I share a little bit? But I'm working with kids around social pragmatic skills, and so I'm using Minecraft story mode on YouTube to do that, and I really would love to talk to you some more about your game, because I want to create something similar to that. But I love your idea.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to.
So like the thing that these two ideas have in common, I guess, is that there's sort of story-based, your idea is like a story-based game where there are decision points.
Yeah. So you go through this adventure, these characters are having an adventure, and then they get to a decision point, and there are 3 decisions that pop up on the screen, and each of those decisions determines how the group is going to interact with each other. So
That's cool. And yours is like live players, so kids would do it together. Is that right, Mary Beth?
they could. Right now it's just me and my student.
And your student in the session.
Right.
Yeah. And then you would talk through like the decisions. Very
Yep.
cool. Emily is a teen services librarian.
Oh, nice.
And also a supervisor of librarians. So she knows, I don't know how much you know about online book kind of games, but she knows an awful lot about books.
I don't know very much about games,
Yeah.
actually. I mean, mostly what I learn is what getting together with teenagers in a group, and then they talk, and they love to inform me about what's cool and what's new. So, but I haven't had any contact with teens for about 9 months because I've been contact tracing.
Yeah.
So I miss teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's some interesting connections here in terms of, I mean, I just love the idea of a book, like a children's book that's dynamic, where there are choices. And I know there were like choose your own adventure books, but this just seems so much richer and more, just so many more choices. So that's really, really cool. So I advertised in this talk that we were going to talk a little bit about how you went from having a gazillion cool ideas to choosing this project and really sustaining interest and focus on it for how long has it been? Like close to a year, right?
About a year, yeah.
Yeah. How did you do that?
Yeah, man, that is a good question. I think there's a lot of things that I've done on this project that I didn't on others. Probably the number one is accountability, bringing more people on and having an open channel of communication between whatever I'm doing and what other people are doing, and working really hard on not obsessing over curated presentations of what I'm doing, becoming more comfortable with just showing person process. Because every project needs a lot of feedback to succeed. You need failure, basically. You need to do something and then realize that what you came up with isn't actually that good. And then do that over and over and get to a point where you just get used to it. You're like, okay, I've done a lot this week. Maybe 10% is good. Other weeks, everything I do is good. But that by having people that I'm in close correspondence with and that I can share large amounts of stuff without feeling self-conscious, that was probably the number one. And I'm slowly scaling up to be able to do that on social media. It is still extremely uncomfortable. In fact, I think it has a negative effect sometimes because I just associate it so much with something unpleasant. But finding yeah, finding a group of people that they are all in the same boat and they're all creative, and that there is some kind of common language of creating stuff and shooting out ideas and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. So basically, by creating community with other people within the context of this project, you've created a culture where you're accountable to other people because you're all in it together. You're requiring things of them. They're expecting things of you. So it just keeps going, and you get to have the experience over and over again of trying something that doesn't work or needs refinement or whatever, and getting that immediate feedback so that you're not sitting there with something and just wondering.
Yeah, and really getting comfortable with the process of, I feel like when I make something, it is a representation of, I don't know, of my soul, of something really deep. And it takes a lot of work to unlearn that, to share things that I'm not proud of and say, look, I did this, and it's actually, like a week later, I realized that wasn't that cool. But that once you share a large enough number of things, it kind of takes the scariness out of it.
Yeah, and then, I mean, the other thing that's interesting about that is if I circle it all the way back to the idea of assessments being the most brain draining part of doing something, right? If you are taking some of the sting out of each of the assessments by having them happen immediately and just being a natural part of the process, then they require so much less brain power. And they're also, they're just part of the process. They happen quickly, you know about them right away. So like I think about, for example, writing a book in isolation. I can write 200 pages. If I never show it to anybody, I'm carrying the burden of like, is it a good book? Did this make sense? How do people, but the minute I send it out to beta readers, they're sort of like, this love affair is falling flat, or I don't understand where your legs are in this scene, or whatever. Like you get very immediate feedback about what makes sense and what doesn't, and then immediately there's a response, right? So it's that putting something into the world, getting the response, reacting, and yeah, instead of getting like one iteration, like a draft a year, you can get kind of a draft a week, or little micro drafts that are sort of leading toward that sense of a whole project coming together. Yeah. It's really, I mean, it's very common. I mean, it's really similar to what you were talking about in sketching and sorting, because if you're sketching, and I know that part of your process with the other people on your team is you invite them to sketch in the sense that you want them to draw quickly. You want them to make bad art, right? In the sense that they're supposed to be just doing things quickly, putting them out there, getting responses, and getting used to that same process as part of the culture of Ruben's machine. And then the meaning of the individual drawing is much less than the trajectory of the art over time becoming more and more what they want it to look like and what you want it to look like for the game.
Yeah, that they are, instead of each piece instead of it being a piece, it is just a tiny component in something that is moving very fast. So when you look at a very large body of illustrations, it's basically the same thing as sketching and sorting, like you were saying, where it's just observing them without assessing them, but then patterns arise, and some patterns will be more compelling than other patterns. You don't have to think, is this a good drawing or is this a bad drawing? It is, does this fit this pattern, or does this fit that pattern?
Right.
And by skipping the assessment stage, it just feels better.
Yeah, and I mean, for some people, they don't even just get stuck on, is this a good drawing? They get stuck on, am I a good artist? Which is even harder.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they do go hand in hand, but yeah, it is.
Right.
Yeah, very, very hard to be vulnerable with your ego and art.
Yeah.
I just want to share too, I belong to this online teletherapy group, and someone posted the other day, I just thought she was so brave. She posted a video of all of clips of her doing therapy wrong. She's the whole thing was, I wanted to share with you all of my mistakes. And she comes like, I can't believe I did this. Do you see what I did? You know, and and she put that out on social media. And I thought it was kind of brilliant because she was acknowledging that process of, yeah, some things, some days, you know, I'm going to be doing it wrong, but I'm going to acknowledge that. And I'm going to acknowledge that in front of everyone else. And so I thought there was such a level of transparency. It made me want to follow her a little more, you know, check out what she was doing because she was so transparent about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are the qualities that I would value too. That I would love to be able to do that myself. It's so scary to do stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
really.
cool.
Really hard. Yeah, I'm in a coaching program right now, and part, to earn my sort of next credential up. And we have to record ourselves doing coaching sessions and then share them with our mentor coaches, and then they evaluate us and give us pointers and whatever. And the teacher said, resist the temptation to give me your best tape a bunch of things, and then share the one, which is so, I had an experience when I was a new teacher. I had a principal come into my school and say, I really want you to grow and I want you to take risks, and please invite me into your classroom when you're going to try something new or take a risk. Don't give me the dog and pony show. And I did exactly that. I invited him in and tried something that fell flat on its face. And then he said to me, when it was time for us to decide whether I got tenure, and when I say us, I mean him, he said, I'm convinced that you're a good teacher, but I'm not sure if you're a great teacher. That lesson I saw was pretty messy. And it took my department chair going in and like fighting tooth and nail for me to get tenure. And then I ended up having a wonderful relationship with him, and he ended up loving me as a teacher and thinking I was great. But I mean, there is a real risk in showing people your soft underbelly. Even if they tell you they want to see it, sometimes, it's really scary.
Yeah.
So,
A little bait and switch there.
well, and I think his intentions were totally good. I think the truth of the matter is that he was conflicted as a new principal between what he really believed was a good way to lead and his own fears that maybe he wasn't going to make it either, And so I think it's a good object lesson in giving lip service to the idea that mistakes are okay, and really recognizing in yourself what you feel when you see a big old oopsie. Because I think a lot of people who are creative are perfectionistic, and we can say that we want to see all the rough meta stuff, but when we really see it, we may go straight to a reaction or so, and I think that's the beauty of what you've been talking about, Ruben, which is just like, and also what you were talking about, Mary Beth, with the example of your friend who put out like a panoply of mistakes, right? Like if you just record everything and you see the patterns and just keep doing it over and over again, it takes the sting out of those mistakes, I think, because you also get to catch people being really good, and there's a bigger sample set, and it just becomes part of the ecosystem. I think I might almost feel braver about doing it, and this is so cheating, but if I had a successful project and I could retroactively go back and show all the mistakes I had made in getting to success, I think that would be easier than live and on TV, just making mistakes. But I actually think it's the former that has gotten Ruben's machine to where it is, right? Because you had to be willing to create this culture among the people on your team and just put stuff out and put stuff out. And I mean, within that, you're getting braver about sharing.
Yeah.
And more public about sharing. You didn't do it from day one quite as publicly as you intend to eventually. But
yeah, I'm slowly scaling up, and like you said, I've tried to convince myself that, oh, just share it once, it's done and it's good. But it's not the right way to do things. You gotta take the risk.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, back on that experience, if I had lost that job because I took a risk and he was too chicken to keep me on, it would have been the wrong fit for me. And the fact that he saw his way clear to being able to looking at my performance as a whole and getting feedback from other people rather than basing his assessment on that one lesson, I think meant that even though it was messy and hard for him to lead and he didn't do it as cleanly as he was hoping to, he ultimately did end up being that kind of leader, and it did end up being a good. So, I mean, to get meta again, even getting used to what mistakes look like, even that can have some mistakes in it.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, you know. Interesting. What else? Anything else?
I'm just noticing that it just all comes down to ego tripping us up, right? I mean that. I'm sorry for the cats in the background.
It's delightful.
The cats in the background. I'm waiting for your little mustachioed Marvel to show up.
He's here. He's here. He has a perfect butterfly of a mustache.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's our new kitten.
Yeah, the ego thing, right? That's really the thing. And I think the other piece is like you've chosen to collaborate, Ruben, with other people and bring them in. And I think even that is kind of a scary thing to do, to say like, I'm going to open up my project to get the energetic boost that bringing other people in will give me.
Yeah, that reminds me of I guess going way back to your question of how to stick with a project. The community was big, but also the other big thing, which I didn't remember back then, was looking at my old stuff and seeing just the insane volume of projects that I never finished. It hurt to see. I thought, wow, if I just stuck to one thing, I could have got a lot done. So it's a habit that I still do, which is just open up the vault and check out stuff, just as a reminder that there's, I guess, comparing what's happening versus what had happened is such a stark difference. And just being aware of what my natural tendency is, what I like to do, and then what actually happens, which usually what actually happens was just endless tangents, but now, at least lately, it is coalescing in something.
Do you think the coalescence is happening partly because of your sketching practice?
Hard to say. Because the sketching practice was only recently recognized, maybe a few months ago. It was being practiced informally with my teammates and I. It was that is the culture as a project of just do stuff, do it fast, don't worry if it's good or bad. Only recently has it been a little more methodical, of where it's become a routine for me, of especially when there is a task that I cannot do, but just for every day as well. Get in the habit of I know a task that I can always do. And so if I'm feeling stuck or if anything, I just think, oh, I'll sketch. and it always gets me up.
Yeah, that's maybe one of the most important things about sketching, because it stops that feeling of being blocked. And it's interesting. I mean, is it okay if I share your story about the side game that you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sure.
It was interesting. A couple of weeks ago, Ruben was like, "I've strayed," because he was really frustrated and sort of hit a roadblock, and he ended up coming up with an idea for another game, right? Which in the past would have been evidence that might have been so compelling to him that he might have gone off on another tangent, followed the shiny thing, and abandoned the current project in favor of this new one. And he was kind of worried about it, like, am I doing this thing? And it became clear as we coached that inventiveness and that way of just like coming up with a cool new idea, as a stimulant, really, as a way to get you moving forward, that was like a really healthy, great thing to do. And that the difference is now you can tell the difference between, like, this is a fun diversion, I'll set it aside, maybe someday I'll do it, but this is my main project, and a less, a less focused approach in the past. But it's really interesting in terms of that, like, feeling sad about the big vault of things that you started, because the other thing that strikes me is, like, there is kind of a journeyman or journeywoman thing about making stuff that happens too. Like, I have so many partially finished books and stories in my history. Like, I just moved recently and I was going through old boxes, and I have partial novel drafts, and I look back at them and I think, like, oh wow, there are sparks of things that I'm interested in now, and there were some really great things about this. And I can also see that they didn't really need to see the light of day. And that by the time I was ready to commit to writing a book start to finish, it was an idea that was compelling enough that it just kept coming back and insisting to be made. And a lot of those things that I had worked on in the past happened anyway. And we were talking the other day about a quote from the play Arcadia by Tom Stoppard. And one of the characters is mourning, like, the burning of the library at Alexandria and all the beautiful work that was lost. And the other character says, it wasn't lost. Like we carry stuff along our history, and we drop things along the way and we pick them up, and it just shows the same things show up over and over again, and it's okay, kind of. So, I mean, that's the other thing about sorting. The sorting part is that you do start to see patterns, and you do start to see the things that are really compelling to you, and those can become more of the focus. Because, like you said, if you see a big cluster of bees, you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to spend some time reflecting on the nature of bee. What is this thing that I'm so interested in? And,
Especially without assessing it or without judging it, maybe judgment is a better verb.
yeah.
Because something might be coming up, and you might be something where you think, oh, that is frivolous, or that is something that I should not be thinking about. If it comes up over and over, it is always worth thinking about. Even if it is what seems to be the most frivolous waste of time, it's important. It is something that is recurring. It's a pattern that is right in front of your eyes. So you really can't ignore those things.
Yeah. And just interrogating it, just finding out what it is and why it's so compelling. Maybe that puts it to bed in and of itself, but maybe it reveals that there's something really interesting going on there that warrants further exploration.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we are at 5 o'clock. That went awfully quickly. The beautiful SNAC salon with presentation by Ruben Lopez, CEO of Ruben's Machine and artiste.